Antelope Freeway 1 mile. Antelope Freeway 1/2 mile. Antelope Freeway 1/4 mile. Antelope Freeway 1/8 mile. Antelope Freeway 1/16 mile. Antelope Freeway 1/32 mile. Antelope Freeway 1/64 mile. Antelope Freeway 1/128 mile. Antelope Freeway 1/256 mile. Antelope Freeway 1/512 mile. We've just passed Antelope Freeway.
This is Dale Matthews. At BadCounty.com, we can all keep track of what our county government is up to and evaluate whether we approve of what they're doing or not. They hate that. In public meetings, the commissioners call us names and threaten us and laugh in our faces and make up crazy new rules to make us stop reporting what they do. But it looks like people care, and there is strength in numbers and information because we hit 92,000 views today. A case in point is the hated November 2013 Solid Waste Ordinances that were defeated by 80% of the voters. They started out with a lie. You know, that's not very nice, but there's really no other way to put it. Despite what people think they know, it all started with a proposal by Simon Hare. Yes, Simon Hare was the original person that brought it to the other two commissioners, Cheryl Walker and Keith Hick, who knew really nothing about these ordinances, and suggested that they go ahead and move it forward at the very next meeting. Well, the other two commissioners dragged their feet a little bit and wanted to look further into it. The number that was brought to them was that there were 300 cases of solid waste ordinance violations that were clogging up the court. 300 cases. That seemed like a lot. So citizens got together and started looking at these cases. $500 needed to be paid to just look at the numbers. Remember, Simon Hare is the one that told me, Mr. Matthews, it's going to cost you a lot of money to keep up with what we're doing. So $500 paid for one of 3 years of accumulation of cases. So if it's one of 3 years, there should be about 100 cases that you would find. You know how many we found? 2. 2 cases, and if you multiply that times 3, because it would have cost $1,500 to look at all 3 years, multiply that by 3, and you come up with 6. Now, 6 versus 300. This is not a slip of the tongue. You don't say 300 when you mean 6. It's a 4,400% exaggeration. It's a lie. There weren't that many cases. Though there was nothing about that in the Courier, nothing on TV, nothing on KJO. We took up the case. We went to the Ann Basker and we spoke. We put videos at BadCounty.com. We printed it in First Friday newspaper, the monthly paper I run. We got no response at all when we mentioned this lie to the county commissioners. I mean, no response. Gee, you said there were 300, but there aren't 300. This is how the whole thing started. There weren't 300. And the response we got was, crickets in the corner. They had absolutely nothing to say. I took it to the county legal counsel, Steve Rich. He had nothing to say. The commissioners had nothing to say. The Courier wouldn't print the story. It never appeared on KJO, the rotary radio station in town. Nothing. We never could get them to answer that question. So that's how it started, with a complete falsehood. Cheryl Walker did talk about numbers, about the overwhelming support there was for these new ordinances. We have to have them, because people are begging me for them. They're saying we need to have these. Why, this is the best idea. Well, now we know, when we're looking back at it, that all the ridiculing that she did of citizens saying, no, we don't want these. Well, you'll see who's telling the truth. Just wait till there's a vote. Well, there's been a vote, and 80% of the public said they didn't want them. Well, what happened to all those people who were telling her on a daily basis, we have to have these, you can trust me, she said, just wait till the vote happens, you'll find out. Well, we did find out. So who was telling the truth and who wasn't? If there was overwhelming support, why did her point of view only get 20% of the vote? Despite that overwhelming support, the only way the commissioners could get this onto the ballot was to force it on there. It wasn't done with citizen initiatives. Steve Rich, the county legal counsel, wrote the ordinances by getting information from other sources, other counties. In fact, some of the things that he wrote into the ordinances didn't make any sense in the context of Josephine County. There were all kinds of errors in it. First thing we noticed as citizens was that the proceeds from the fines, the new fines, would go directly into the bank accounts of the accusers. What? Yes, the departments that said you owed a fine would get the money. Well, do you think that might affect them at all in finding you guilty of something? These ordinances were filled with mistakes. And when the citizens went to the Ann Basker Auditorium and to the weekly business session and said, there's all these mistakes that we found. We can maybe work with you to fix it. No, you're wrong, says Cheryl Walker and Keith Eck. Now, about this time, Simon Hare turned on the ordinances. He decided he wasn't going to back them anymore. These will be very expensive. But Cheryl Walker and Keith Eck, don't leave him out of this. They were dead set on making sure that people voted on these ordinances and absolutely convinced, and nobody can convince them otherwise, that they had universal support. As a matter of fact, they said more than once, well, you're just the people showing up here in the Ann Basker. Wait till you see how many people, 20%, will be voting for these because, it's everywhere we go. People are begging us for these. These people that were begging them for these either must have been completely made up or, I don't know. How could they possibly have made this big a mistake? Cheryl Walker tried very hard to dominate every conversation on this subject. They brought it up again and again and again at the Ann Basker. And after a person would finish their little 3 minutes of saying, I don't think this is a very good idea, she could easily go on to 15, 20 minutes, 25 minutes, explaining to us all how we were completely wrong, and we're just the people that show up at these meetings, and what do we really know, and just wait till you find out. Well, we found out. Keith Eck backed this tactic all the way. For example, Walker wanted 15 minutes to present, totally on her own, nobody interrupting her, with no chance for rebuttal. And the commissioners voted on this. Simon Hare said, I think there should be some rebuttal. No, Keith Eck, don't leave Keith Eck out of this, voted with Cheryl Walker that she would be the only one that could present. Really, the only one that could present. Now, you can talk for 3 minutes, unless they interrupt you, which they did constantly. They were interrupting us. Finally, citizens won a chance to rebut. But Walker and Heck wanted another 15-minute presentation set aside for Cheryl Walker. See, one wasn't enough. She needed twice as much time as anybody else. And they voted. And they voted, yes, she gets twice as much time. Then Walker insisted that in this debate that was going to happen, this wasn't really a debate because you don't get the chance to talk to each other. Oh, no, you can't allow that. So it would be serial presentations. Now, in every serial presentation in debate class, if you're not going to be talking to each other, the proponents of the new idea, they always go first. It's a harder position when you go first. The proponents always go first, and the opponents always go second. Well, she insisted that the opposition must go first. What? Really? You're just leaving no first you want twice as much time as anybody else, and then you insist that the opposition must go first? This is not the way that these things are run. Well, Simon Hare pointed out, he says, I'm trying to remember from debate class, he knows what the rules are, and I think really the proponents must go first. Well, the other two commissioners took a vote and said, no, the opposition must go first. And this is when Simon Hare made his famous kangaroo court speech. He's criticizing his own fellow commissioners and saying, you're voting on this thing and it's completely wrong and you're getting your way just because it's 2-1, and he referred to them as a kangaroo court. Boy, they weren't happy. But they got their way. Walker and Heck. She never could have succeeded at this if it wasn't for Keith Heck. So how did this end up being reported by other media? Well, they skipped over the part about Cheryl Walker wanting twice as much time. And they skipped over the part about how the opponents had to go first. The Courier talked about what a great job that Cheryl Walker did in making her points, and about all that overwhelming support, keeping in mind that we know now that there wasn't overwhelming support, but that was the Courier's version. K-Joe talked about the overwhelming support. And Walker and Heck repeated at every meeting that there was overwhelming support. Why, you're just opposing something you don't need to oppose. There's so many people against you, it doesn't matter what you say. So no matter how many people showed up at the Ann Basker to argue otherwise, even Simon Hare saying, this is going to cost us a lot of money. Really, are you sure that this, I don't think we've got that overwhelming support. Nope, not going to listen. To enforce the idea that they were the sole source of information, the commissioners decided that on this issue, there would be no voters' pamphlet. No voters' pamphlet. Right. I mean, it was coming up on a ballot. It was for an election, but they voted that there would be no voters' pamphlet. See, overwhelming numbers show that people don't want a voters' pamphlet. This is really what they said. And people kept talking to Cheryl Walker. People, we don't know who they were. Please don't allow a voters' pamphlet. We don't want a voters' pamphlet. We don't need a voters' pamphlet. We're overwhelmingly supporting this. Now, the city had a levy on the ballot at that time, November of 2013. Most leadership there didn't want a voters' pamphlet either. They had a levy on the ballot, but they didn't want a voters' pamphlet. Now, what's that about? Well, see, if there's a voters' pamphlet, then that means that people will be allowed to put in arguments pro and con on the issues. The Grants Pass city government leaders did not want people to be able to put in arguments that were against their levy. And Cheryl Walker and Keith Heck absolutely did not want that either. You see, the county's chief financial officer at that time, Rosemary Paget, also did not budget for it. Now, they knew that there was going to be a levy on the ballot by the city. And they also knew by that time that these ordinances were being pushed forward. But they never set aside any money for there to be a voter's pamphlet for this. In the little back room, where the commissioners get together inside the courthouse, with hardly anybody there except me, I'm at all of those meetings, the argument was by Cheryl Walker that people don't want a voter's pamphlet. They don't want one. They're asking me, please don't have a voter's pamphlet. That it would be enough just to put out the government's version of what this will mean for you, with things like how wonderful it'll be, and this will streamline this and be happier for that, and everyone's going to benefit, the typical government stuff. Keith Heck said, no voter's pamphlet. Ain't going to happen. Well, Simon Hare said, well, what if people were to come in with $10,000 in cash? It wouldn't cost that much, but suppose that they did. Keith Heck's answer, ain't going to happen. So later on, when asked about this, Cheryl Walker said, it was because people didn't want it. Oh, no, it was because we couldn't afford it. And I got up at the Ann Basker and I said, wait a minute, I was at that meeting, and you said it wouldn't be allowed even if the people brought in $10,000 in cash. Do you remember that? Silence. So Sandy Casanelli put up the money in cash from her own bank account to be reimbursed later by others. Well, the commissioners didn't know what to say. Here were citizens that were showing, yes, we want a voter's pamphlet. Of course we want a voter's pamphlet. Well, Cheryl Walker had said, well, if we allow a voter's pamphlet, why, just anybody could write an argument against this. Well, that just doesn't pass my smell test. Hey, wait a minute. That's the way voter's pamphlets always work. You put up a little money to defray the cost, and then you get to say your opinion. She did not want people to be able to say their opinion. Well, some of the Grants Pass city leaders were finally overturned, and Sandy's money was returned because they decided, well, I guess we should have a voter's pamphlet after all. So what was the bottom line of all that? Well, in the voter's pamphlet, there were 14 arguments against and 0 in favor. Still, that wasn't enough for the commissioners. They were still sure that this was going to pass. Walker and Heck were very angry that people were allowed to put their arguments in the voter's pamphlet, and this had something to do with these rather confusing ordinances being explained, and then people said, well, I don't want that. Of the 4 ordinances, all of them were defeated by as much as 80% no. So you can go to BadCounty.com if you wish, and you can see some of the stories, some of the videos that followed all this. One of them is called, Not Even If the Voters Beg to Pay for It Out of Their Own Pockets. Simon Hare accuses his own board of being a kangaroo court. Just because I'm contradicting myself, why are you shaking your head? Walker's code enforcement says, pay the fine first, then the trial starts. That was one of the things that they said. Commissioners abuse and misquote citizens, then threaten them if they object. Heck and Walker vote that she should get twice as much time as her opponents. Commissioners are shocked when citizens pay cash for a voter's pamphlet. Walker claims she knows what voters want. The difference is somewhere around $4,000. The board's levy promotion cost taxpayers $3,200. No, we're just going to do a flyer, and that's it. Commissioner Heck calls citizen testimony inane and asinine. Commissioner Heck says, it's ludicrous, but most of your remarks are. And then, in summary, the commissioners blame each other for the new ordinances. Hare says citizens should probably not voice their opinions about the election. What? Hare says citizens should probably not voice their opinion about the election. Simon Hare complains that these videos dilute the county's message.
We just passed Antelope Freeway.